Diversity, equity, and inclusion training. If you work for any corporate America industry that of any size or note, you've had to sit through these training exercises from the almighty, all-powerful, unforgiving HR department. A lot of times it's a video clicked on a link that you have to sit through a scenario and then answer a quiz to prove that you're diverse and hold equity as the highest principle. And ultimately, if you watch them, they end up being, well, kind of biased, actually. I mean, for bias training, they're pretty good at showing a bias. Well, one woman stood up and said, I'm not going to take this anymore. She's a registered nurse. Her name is Laura Morgan. And, well, Ms. Morgan joins us now. Did you get fired because you refused to take this training?
Yes, I did. And thank you, Larry, for this opportunity. I was fired for refusing to complete a course called Overcoming Unconscious Bias, which is a concept that tells people that, well, we have bias against our patients. We just don't realize it. And so we have to be trained to get that concept into our minds and to have us think about how we might be harming our patients actually by our
Wow.
unconscious biases.
So unconscious bias, I love all the buzz phrases, and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's all CRT, really. It's all critical race theory injected now into corporate America. And I don't know about you, I've had to take these things too. The suggestion, the implication when you sit down to start to take this is, you sir, you ma'am, you're racist, right? You're guilty until
Yes.
proven innocent.
Yes. And the idea of implicit bias and its close cousin, anti-racism, it declares in my industry that the entire healthcare system is systemically racist. And so the biases must be rooted out. And this is really bad for medicine because placing this type of faulty emphasis on the doctor-patient or nurse-patient relationship, it erodes the dynamic of trust that's essential when caring for people.
Yeah, you're so right. Listen, it's one thing when Dunder Mifflin Paper Company decides to do diversity and equity training. I mean, the implications are not necessarily going to be too far-reaching. But you're not with this organization called Do No Harm, donoharmmedicine.org. And on your website it says, the same radical movement behind critical race theory in the classroom and defund the police is coming after healthcare. Explain how that works. How is it coming after our healthcare industry now?
Well, it's true. Anti-racism agendas and implicit bias training are just two examples of radical ideologies that are infiltrating the industry and also our academic settings.
Mm-hmm.
You know, medical students and nurses, they all go to college, and I think we're all pretty well aware of how CRT has invaded those spaces. And it really is detrimental to the medical field because it tells healthcare providers to look at patients with an ideological perspective instead of a clinical one.
Can you give us an example of how this manifests, either on the job, in a hospital, or in a healthcare environment, or just an example of one of the questions on this presentation that you had to sit through?
Well, why I objected to being mandated to take unconscious bias training is that the material is intended to tell healthcare providers what to think instead of how to think. And my job at my former employer was as an educator. I was supposed to guide clinicians and young nurses into developing critical thinking skills, not critical race theory skills. So the ability to think critically is a lot more valuable toward taking care of your patients than the ability to cite your organization's DEI initiatives.
So do no harm medicine, obviously you borrow from the famous phrase in the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. Obviously your implication here is that they are doing harm. What kind of harm is coming from these new policies?
Well, as an example of a question in the course that I was asked to take, the final question that you could not complete the course unless you acknowledged this was, Are you willing to challenge your biases in the moment of decision making so you don't unintentionally treat someone unfairly? And that's a faulty way to approach your patients when there's important clinical decisions to be made, not thinking about, oh, how might I be biased against this patient?
Wow. I mean, we've just come off of a couple of years of trust the science, trust the data, trust the science, trust the data. And by the way, I do trust science when the scientific method is actually employed. But what you just described there, that doesn't sound like science at all.
No, it isn't. And that's not the way that medical students and nursing students are being educated, and they're being indoctrinated early and often because critical race theory has really made its way into a lot of medical school curricula. And so when they get to them as first year medical students and then pound that message in over a matter of several years, then you end up with medical students or new nursing graduates whose thoughts are, yes, I know a lot about implicit bias and critical race theory, and so therefore they don't object to it.
Yeah, it's funny that we saw this stuff. This has been a conversation on our college campuses and in academia for a couple of decades now, since the politically correct movement sort of infiltrated. But there was always this, understanding that, yeah, it was for the liberal arts degrees and that sort of thing and the social degrees, but not science, not technology. But we are seeing this creep now into science, technology, engineering, that in some way you design a building differently or you treat a patient differently based on an implied bias or questioning your own implicit bias because of a patient's skin color. That shouldn't really factor in. How would it?
It really shouldn't. And, we'll all eventually use the healthcare systems. So Americans need to know what's going on with these outrageous trainings and indoctrination of the people who are going to take care of them. But the system itself really needs to wake up and abandon these ideologies. Let's get the focus back on the business of taking care of people who place their trust in us when they need us.
You've become obviously a representative of another way, of standing up and walking away. So if there is a medical student out there who's facing this now in academia, or maybe an actual medical professional, someone in the healthcare industry who sees the same thing you saw, what should they do? What would you advise?
I advise them to go to donoharmmedicine.org, go to our newsroom tab, look at the work that we're doing, look at perspectives from the other side of this, because we're a network of key stakeholders. We have doctors, nurses, other healthcare providers, patients, even hospital administrators contact us. And I've been told, thank you very much for saying something about this. I unfortunately can't do so because I can't afford to lose my job. And I couldn't either. Yeah. But the ability to stand up and say something really can start to make a change.
And that really is it. I mean, basically, you've got your HR department coming down on you saying, take this training. It sure would be a shame for you to lose your income, lose your job, lose your house, lose everything you've got. So just take the training. And of course, most people are like, fine, I'll sit here, I'll watch the thing, I'll click the buttons, and then I'll move on because I don't want to cause a problem.
That's exactly what they're counting on. And there are several states now that are requiring implicit bias training as a condition of receiving a medical or nursing or other healthcare provider license. Wow. I was fired because I didn't fulfill a condition of employment. But now we have states like Kentucky and Maryland and Michigan and Iowa who make these requirements of people to even get a license and practice in the first place. And that's very destructive to the healthcare industry.
It is, and it's the politicization of a practice in our country that should be one of the few bastions that's free of politics. If you could sum this up here again with Do No Harm Medicine and what the next step is for your organization.
Well, we exist because doctors and nurses and students and members of the public go to donoharmmedicine.org, where they can become members, learn about what we're doing. They can submit concerns to us they have about medical wokeness they're seeing in their workplace or school.
Yeah, that's great. And listen, there's safety in numbers. The bottom line is you're not alone out there. If you're seeing this, get with the group, and trust me, more voices will actually be heard sooner. Ma'am, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for being a courageous leader in this realm. More to come on O'Connor Tonight.